Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm doing my very first author spotlight on the podcast, discussing the works of Mitch Albom. I've read a total of 7 of his books thus far throughout the years. I'm a big fan of not only his writing style, but of course the themes he writes about in his books, namely of what it means to live a fulfilling life, and the connection with death and the afterlife, and when people are gone, and how when they're gone all we have left are those cherished, beautiful memories, and living a fulfilling life, things that make us happy, and of course the people we care about in our lives, love, family, all those wonderful universal themes. And I'm going to read the About the Author section from his latest book, Finding Chika. Mitch Albom is the author of numerous works of fiction and nonfiction. He has written 7 #1 New York Times bestsellers, including Tuesdays with Morrie, the best-selling memoir of all time. His books have collectively sold more than 40 million copies worldwide and have been translated into 47 languages in 49 territories. Albom has also penned award-winning TV films, internationally produced stage plays, a musical, and for 30 years a syndicated newspaper column. He was voted America's best sports columnist by the Associated Press sports editors 13 times in his career. In 2006, Albom founded Say Detroit, which now oversees 9 full-time charities in the Metro Detroit area. And in 2010, he began operating the Have Faith Haiti Orphanage in Port-au-Prince, which he visits monthly. He and his wife Janine live in Michigan. And I'm going to talk about each of his books that I've read, not in the order they were published, but rather in the order I read them. So the very first book I had ever read, written by Mitch Albom, is For One More Day. And it's such a lovely, profound book. Each of these books has made me cry, also beautiful. And I read this book with my mom, and then I told her now I was reading his latest books, and she was like, oh yeah, his books are always so emotional and everything. And this book, I remember at the time, it was back in 2007, that was when they had made a TV movie based on the book. So I remember watching the movie and then wanting to read the book, or maybe vice versa. Like, we read the book and then seeing that there was a TV movie. But what I love about it, like, also just talking about his writing structurally, I like the fact that he doesn't write linear and chronologically in terms of the events of the story. He jumps around within the narrative of past and present, of what, like, the character growing up in his childhood, and then in the present what's going on. So in this book, for instance, it's about a man named Charlie who is going to commit suicide, and then he survives the attempt, and then he comes into contact with his mother, who has passed away, and she spends one more day with him, hence For One More Day. And it's one of those wish fulfillment things of when people are gone, how we wish we could just have a little more time with them, however much, whether it's a day, whether it's just one more conversation. And that's what's just so heartfelt about each of these books, that we all connect with when people are gone, how much we miss them. And you just look back on the beautiful memories and let those keep you strong and just bring a smile to your face, and that they're never really gone, they're always with us. And so with this book, how it jumps around between things such as times my mother stood up for me, and then times I didn't stand up for my mother, things like that, of that nature. And it's basically him realizing that, wow, I was about to kill myself, and that's absolutely horrible, that it's just so devastating. So thank goodness he survives that. But then just reflecting on the time when his mother was alive, since now For One More Day, one of those mystical things that can't be described. And it's just so lovely then before she leaves, with throughout her life how she'd always correct his grammar. So then when she's about to leave again, then he says, my mother and me, and then she gives him a kiss on the forehead, my mother, like me and my mother, and then she corrects him, my mother and I. Just cute. And just how mothers being so doting. And so this one really, of course, focusing on the love between a mother and son, and how her with her unconditional love, and then him though with kids, how sometimes we're selfish, we don't realize it, and then him kind of having regret in that sense, and that when the last time he saw her, and then he just regrets that because then she had passed, and he at the time was going to be potentially play the major leagues in baseball as a New York Met, New York Mets. And the book itself, too, is dedicated to Mitch Albom's mother. It says, "This book is dedicated with love to Rhoda Albom, the mommy of the mummy." So I remember just reading this book with my mom, and we loved it. And the TV movie, as I recall, was nice, too. And just anything, though, the book is always better because, the narrative and just like little moments of pure joy and happiness, that these cherished memories. And then the ending, when he does pass away, then it's his own daughter with the epilogue, and then saying, as a callback to earlier in the novel, where it ends with her saying, "If my father said it, I believe it," because with him always saying, "If my mother said it, I believe it." So just that unbreakable trust you have from a mother, that no matter what, she's just like your number one fan and just the person you could always rely on. So then him feeling guilty sometimes that he wasn't always the best person he could be towards her, like always so much love and affection from her, but not always him in the other sense. But then knowing that that's what gave her joy, that just seeing her own son just be happy and just doing all this stuff for him, that's just what gave her joy. And that's what true motherly love is, that unconditional love. So it's just that really beautiful relationship, and captured so beautifully and heartfelt, and just a really truly lovely book, and to this day one of my favorites of his. The next book I read from Mitch Albom is a book I had always heard of, so then I finally read it, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. This was a huge best-selling novel at the time, and I remember people in my class reading it, and I was interested in reading it. And then when I finally read it, I will say, of all the books I've read by Mitch Albom, this one is my least favorite. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, it's just that there are things about it. In particular, I will just say, the main character to me, he's not as likable compared to the other characters in Mitch Albom's books. But the concept is interesting, where the main character, Eddie, dies, and then he comes into contact with 5 people who were somehow meaningful to him throughout his life. So whether he was somehow connected with their death or just people he knew throughout his life. So he was in the army, so one of the people is the captain, one of them was his wife, one of them was a little girl who had died. And I remember reading a review about it after the fact, where someone's saying, it just felt a little too specific to him. It didn't feel like this universal thing of people you can touch in your own life, such as whether it's, mentors, teachers, or siblings, just anything that we can all connect with, perhaps. With this, it felt a little too specific to him. And I agreed with that. I thought, I could see that. So it just felt to me that he wasn't as a sympathetic of a character compared to other books. It's still, of course, well written. It's still beautiful and touching, but just not my favorite of the bunch, ironically, even though it was such a hugely popular book. And then I know he had done a sequel for it, The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, which I haven't read. I don't know if I ever plan on reading it, but you never know. But it's still a great book, of course it is, but just not my favorite. And then the next book I read is the classic Tuesdays with Morrie, the best-selling memoir of all time. I didn't know that. And this was, in fact, the first book he published. And he wrote it, so it's Tuesdays with Morrie, an old man, a young man, and life's greatest lesson. So it's about his sociology professor named Morrie Schwartz, who was Mitch Albom's favorite professor. He would talk with him, share ideas. He was a wonderful mentor to him. And when he graduated, he gave Morrie a gift, a briefcase with his initials on it. And Morrie told him to stay in touch. And then he didn't for the next 16 years, as he writes about that. Life happened. He met his wife, Janine. They got married. He was working a lot. And then by chance, when he was watching Nightline, he saw they were doing a piece about none other than Morrie, who tragically was diagnosed with ALS, otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease. So then he called him up, got back in contact with him. And I remember reading the afterword from this book, and that for whatever reason he left this out of the actual book, that when he had called, the first thing Morrie said was, "How come you didn't call me Coach?" Because he always called him Coach. So he wrote that after the fact. That's not in the actual memoir. But he wrote this memoir in the first place to help with Morrie's medical bills. And he said that he didn't really know what he was doing and that he didn't know if it was going to sell. He thought it was going to just be a small book. But because it's with memoirs, you're supposed to like write about yourself usually. And this was like, is this really a memoir if you're writing about someone else? I think he had problems with that with the publishing it at the time. But it's, of course, so beautifully written. And the fact that it's tragically true that his professor then passed away from this disease at the age of 78 in 1995. So then he just felt guilty, though, of losing touch with him, and that then reconnecting with him and just seeing the world through Morrie's eyes. Morrie, who was dying and then confined to a wheelchair, and he always loved dancing, and then he couldn't move anymore. And just him reflecting on what's truly beautiful and important about life. And one moment when he looks out at the window saying, "I appreciate this more than you because to me it's looking at the world, but for you it's just a pane of glass," because that's all he had then, where he couldn't move and walk and all these things that again we take for granted, and then in his deteriorating health. But him always being resilient and kind and just someone that truly you could tell was just so infectious with his spirit, and how moving and profound and powerful the things that he gave to Mitch in terms of his own life, and just how grateful he was for him. And then he was kind of like another son to him, because Morrie and his wife, they had 2 sons. And it's just such a wonderful, wonderful memoir. And of course it's called Tuesdays with Morrie because every Tuesday he would go to visit him. And there's a part when he writes about when in 94 with the O.J. Simpson trials, and how with Morrie he was just like, they were just lifting him to go to the bathroom, and with this huge trial with the verdict, with all of that, and just how that, like with Morrie, it didn't matter because, he had more important things tragically at the end of his life. And then there was a moment when, there's a scene, but it's real life, but it's a moment where he does a living funeral. So everyone just says what they would say when he was gone. So just like talking about his life. And then the moment when he passes, when everyone was out of the room, like when they went to get coffee, and then he passed. And it was just like, because maybe perhaps he didn't want them to see. Oh, it's so touching. And it's just so what a kind, beautiful person Morrie was, and how wonderful that was that Mitch Albom wrote this and was able to help them in that way. And if you haven't read any of his books, I highly recommend starting with this one. It's absolutely wonderful. There's also a lovely moment when his wife, who Mitch Albom always says she's a wonderful singer, but she's shy about singing in front of people. But then when Morrie asked her to sing, then she sang to him. And that's just such a beautiful thing too. So just really knowing about, again, things that you can take for granted, but just knowing what's important in life. And then there's a beautiful moment where afterwards when he passed, and then at the funeral, and then he said, "What am I going to do when you're gone?" And then he just says, "You talk, I'll listen," he had said. I tried doing that in my head, and to my happiness found that the imagined conversation felt almost natural. I looked down at my hands, saw my watch, and realized why. It was Tuesday. So it's a wonderful book, and I know it was made also into a TV movie as well, so another adaptation of it. And it's just a fantastic, lovely book about a wonderful man. Rest in peace, Morrie Schwartz. The next book I read by Mitch Albom is The First Phone Call from Heaven. And this one it was just really great because we just meet all these people. So people who have passed. So one of them is a person's mother, one was a son, and just how they're inexplicably getting these phone calls from their dearly departed loved ones. And it's just one of these strange, bizarre things. Then we meet this man who was wrongly accused of a murder with an airplane that didn't land right. So then he was basically, he's the one that he went to prison for it, even though he didn't do anything. And him just kind of having to regain his life with his son. And there's an interesting twist in this one. I won't say, if you haven't read it, I won't share it because I don't want to spoil it, but it's well done. What's great is that it feels believable, like this fantastical thing of, oh, how are all these people connecting with their, like, how are their loved ones calling them again? And then when you find out what actually happened, the reason for all of it, it's a natural and interesting twist that makes sense, and it's just really well done. But it's just really interesting about kind of penance and forgiveness and things like that nature, and really well done. And another truly lovely book that, again, it's one of those things where, oh, you wish you could hear them one more time. People who have gone, just wanting to hear their voice again. Really great book. I really loved this one as well. And then the next book I read by Mitch Albom is The Timekeeper. And this one is great because this one has personified character of time and how everything is measured in time. So we go back to the Stone Ages of the first person who invents time, and he is named Dor. And then we learn about his childhood with Allie, and then they get married, they have children. And of two characters, a girl named Sarah, a teenager who wants to end her life after this whole fiasco with this boy who she thought liked her, and then he was making fun of her. Then we meet an old man who is trying to extend his life for as long as possible. So then Dor being the timekeeper, like grandfather time. So him having to kind of show them that, so you can't have too much time and you can't have too little of it. So it's on both ends of someone wanting to tragically cut their time short and someone selfishly wanting to extend it. So it comes together beautifully as well with these two people who by chance meet, this girl Sarah, this teenager Sarah, and this old wealthy man who is just selfish though and lying to his wife and wanting to preserve his body. Victor, that's right. And through that, like learning the importance of him, like what's truly important is his wife and not like quality of life. And with her too, it's that she has so much more to live for, that this one thing won't define her, and that she's going to go on to do brilliant, amazing things, and she does in the book. So again, it's just really well done and a really lovely book. I really enjoyed this one too. And again, how you don't know how much time you have, so you have to make the most of your time, and that's all that matters. The people that are important in your life and the things that make you happy, and just living your life to the fullest. And again, things that we can take for granted, but that's why you always have to just keep living and just keep moving forward, embrace everything about life and all the good and the bad. And it's just really well done. And then afterwards, when they both learn, and then she goes on to become a doctor, and then he's had his fulfilling last months with his wife, and it's just really beautiful. And the next book I read is The Magic Strings of Frankie Presto. And this book is about a musician named Frankie Presto. And it's fiction, but what's fun about this book is that though it's fiction, Mitch Albom wrote it in a way that makes it feel more authentic by including actual singers and writing it in their voices as though they had met Frankie Presto. And then he had all the acknowledgments in the end about thanking all of them for allowing him to write in their voice and trusting him to do that. And there's people such as Tony Bennett, and it's just really, and Darlene Love, and he mentions the Beatles, just all these people that met Frankie Presto, and him being this amazing guitar player and singer growing up in Spain, and his tragic upbringing that his mother had passed giving birth to him, and then a woman who had raised him but then threw him. It's just like tragic, his childhood. And then by chance I won't spoil it either, but with his teacher, and it's just really great too. And then throughout the novel too, how all these things happen, but then there's this whole big reveal too that's really well done, and it makes you think, oh, it just makes sense then, connecting it all. I'm realizing I'm talking in broad strokes because I don't want to spoil anything though. Oh, and a random thing, I just randomly want to bring this up. I just randomly thought of this now. From the first phone call from heaven, I love just small moments too that kind of just make you smile, just like those small moments that just feel so real. And one of them is with the man, and then the father comes over and they were building a snowman, and then the father says, oh, is this your new security guard? Just one of those dad jokes. It just made me smile because it just feels so real. So that's what's just so lovely about his books, how the characters feels so real, even given all of these spiritual themes of, people with the afterlife, how are they here, like things such as that, and it's just really great. So that's just another thing that made me smile that I just thought of that I wanted to bring up. But in this one too, how though he had a hard upbringing, that he worked hard with his music. And what's beautiful too about this book is that it jumps around with the narrative as well, from Frankie's childhood and then growing up, and him with his fame, and then how he loses his way and meeting the love of his life, Aurora. And at the beginning though, it's told in the point of view of music, so the personification of music, and how music talks about when children are born, they reach out with their tiny fists and they grab a handful of music, grabbing that talent. And music's perspective of things, of why do you use, when music mentions why do you use drug and alcohol, you'll think that'll seek me more. Or everyone throughout their lives, they join bands throughout their lives. So a band, whether it's your family, whether it's just all these actual bands, if you're a musician, because Mitch Albom himself was a musician back in the day as well. I'm a musician too. I love my piano, and I played the glockenspiel in elementary school. So the universal thing about music, because Frankie too, he was, though born in Spain, he learned Spanish, and his teacher, the maestro, told him to speak in English. And then when he loses what's most important to him, Aurora, and there are tragic moments with them, but then when they reconnect again and they adopt a daughter, Kai, and he has a bad moment where then he injures himself. And I don't want to get too deep into all like the plot and everything if you haven't read this book, but then when he is able to learn to play again, and just how music, it kind of transforms people, brings out just this beautiful thing where people are in awe. And that's what's just so powerful about music in general. So when people are in awe of someone's talent, and then the magic strings themselves, again, it's another mystical, fantastical thing where every time he ends up saving a person's life, and then the strings turn blue, and the strings were given to him by his late mother. And it's just so beautiful, just in capturing his entire life, because at the start of it, he has already passed, and it's music saying another one of my children has passed, and let's look back at the life of Frankie Presto. And so then it ends with, everyone joins a band in this life, and what you play always affects someone. Sometimes it affects the world. Frankie's symphony ends, and so at last we rest. Beautiful book. Highly recommend this one as well. And the most recent book I read is Mitch Albom's latest memoir, Finding Chika, A Little Girl, an Earthquake, and the Making of a Family. And it's so touching and absolutely beautiful, about a girl named Chika who he met through the orphanage he runs in Haiti, at the mission in Haiti. And he talks about Chika when she was born, how she survived that terrible earthquake in Haiti in 2010. She was born on January 9th, 2010. She was so full of joy and life, and she loved to sing. She seemed like such an amazing girl, and tragically she passed away. She had a brain tumor, and they did all they could to find a cure, and she was a fighter, and she had such a vivacious, bubbly, strong spirit, and it's absolutely beautiful. I can't recommend this book enough. It's so touching and wonderful, and how he talks about the lessons he learned from Chika. So, though she had a short life, she only lived to the age of 7, and how resilient she was, and that she did survive, though, the rate of having this terrible disease, DIPG for short, this brain tumor, and the 7 lessons he learned from her. So this one too is beautifully structured, with writing about how she just came to him one day as if she were alive again, and saying to write her story. And so he jumps around between us, like him and Chika, and then you, and then he's writing as if writing it to her. So you were born Chika, and like saying all this stuff about her, and then just each of the lessons he learned from her, and how profound children can be, and how wise beyond their years. And though she had a short life, that it was so meaningful, and all the people she met, how she had that infectious positive spirit that affected everyone in a beautiful, wonderful way. I feel so blessed to just have read about her, and I feel like I know her too. And he posted videos of her too, with what he talks about in the book of her singing, and then she'd cup her hand over his mouth so she could finish singing. Really cute. Oh my goodness. It's just absolutely beautiful. And basically one of the lessons is saying how children, how they're yours but not yours. And when people would say that, oh, it's wonderful you're doing all this stuff for a child that's not yours, and that he and his wife Janine never thought of it that way, that all of the children in the mission, they are his kids, because he and his wife never had biological children of their own, but they have nieces and nephews, and all of these children in Haiti, that's their children. So it doesn't matter how a family is formed, as he talks about too. And not only, of course, mourning her loss and that she didn't get to live a full life, but being grateful for the time she was here and how she touched so many lives. And she loved to sing. Like, that's just so sweet how she would sing that song Love by Nat King Cole. And it's so heart-wrenching, though, what she had to go through. And then when she passes, and Janine giving her permission, and that's one of those things where it's just so devastating, but it's beautiful. And then she loved princesses, and she would wear the princess dress from Beauty and the Beast, and she just seemed so amazing. And then just her saying that, no, your job is to carry me, to when she'd call him Mr. Mitch, and he says, yes, that's right. And just him wanting to spend all this time with her. And then just even with all the tragic things throughout her life, that all the moments of joy, like when they said they took her to Disneyland, and that even with all the rides, what she was most excited about, the first thing was just seeing a duck, that she was excited to see another living creature and running up to it. That was the thing that was most exciting to her. And how she had so many friends of their colleagues and friends, so many people were so excited to see her, and that she was just a wonderful, resilient, brave girl. And what he says at the end, no matter how a family comes together and no matter how it comes apart, this is true and will always be true. You cannot lose a child. And we did not lose a child. We were given one, and she was glorious. And it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And Chika, an amazing person. And Mitch Albom is a fantastic writer, and I can't recommend this book enough as well. It's absolutely beautiful. So I look forward to his next book. I know he has others that I haven't read, and just, again, beautiful universal themes about the importance of life and love and true joy and silliness. And when he talks about in this book about childhood wonder, and that's just things that we need to just stop and enjoy, all those beautiful moments in life. Truly, truly amazing, wonderful books. And with that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. As always, be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com, or send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, if you put oi and poodle together in the same sentence, you'd have a great new catchphrase, like oi with the poodles already. I'll be discussing Gilmore Girls. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.